And welcome back to my channel, Beth Chats Books. Now today is going to be the first part of my quarterfinals vlog. So I'm going to go through the 3 books that I've already read and wrap them up for you now and then rank them where they're going to sit. And then obviously I'm going to tell you guys my plans for the next 3 books, which ones I'm going to start reading, and obviously I will check in with you guys when I have more progress with those 3 books. So the 3 books that I've read that are already on this list, the first one is Swimming in the Dark by Tomas Jodrowski, and this was set in the 1980s in communist Poland, and it follows 2 male characters who have a bit of a love story. Now in preparation for this I've gone back through my Goodreads because some of these books I read quite a long time ago, and this one in particular was a very muted and understated story, and so I don't really have many concrete memories of this reading experience at all, to be honest. I think it probably is a book that in the future I might reread and see if I get anything from it. I was umming and ahhing whether to reread this particular story, but I've not got a compulsion really to reread it, and I'm in a good position having already read 3 of the 6 books that I don't really want to waste time rereading this one. So at the time I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was well written, but I remember it just had this very elusive quality to it. The plot wasn't very tangible, and I have some parts of it that I remember finding interesting, like the relationship between the 2 boys, and one of the boys has what we would call a beard, a girlfriend, because obviously in communist Poland it would be frowned upon to be gay, and her character is quite interesting towards the end of the book, and the other boy meets her, and there is a section when he visits her that I remember being quite interesting. But overall it had this very dreamlike style that I remember I just couldn't find much to connect with to the point where I would enjoy it. I know for some people those plots that are very dreamlike are very interesting to readers, but for me I like my plot to be a little bit more concrete and tangible. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. That's all I can really remember about it, so I'm going to park it there for that one. The next book that I read was Love After Love by Ingrid Passard, and this was set in Trinidad, and this followed a mother and son, Betty and Solo, and then their friend, Mr. Cheaton. He lives with them, and Mr. Cheaton is a gay man, and I don't want to spoil the plot. There's some interesting development. Betty and Solo have a very interesting relationship, and Mr. Cheaton acts as a father figure to Solo because his father died, and she is battling her relationship with her son a lot, and Mr. Cheaton is almost the character that acknowledges Solo and really sees him. And Mr. Cheaton has always known that he's gay, and he is very anxious about telling both of these characters. And so a lot of discussion around homosexuality in the context of Trinidad is discussed. It's very heartbreaking. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I remember being very emotionally invested in this book, and there are developments that are very sad. But all of these characters were written in a way that you really were on board and part of their team, and you really wanted them to succeed, and when they were stumbling and struggling you really found it very hard as a reader to carry on reading those bits and to be in that space with those characters. This did win the Costa Book Prize for, was it for debut novel? Yeah. It won the 2020 First Novel Prize, and for good reason. I think this was a really interesting story that really swept you up into it. So I remember giving it 4 out of 5 stars because I felt really invested in the characters. The character development was really good. I think the plot was really well written, and we were on a journey with these characters, which I really appreciated. And that was some of my criticism with Swimming in the Dark, that I didn't feel like there was a plot. So the development of their relationship between these two men was very shaky, and there wasn't anything to kind of keep you gripped as a reader, whereas the plot was really well thought out in this novel. And I was quite surprised it was a debut, because it was very well plotted and structured and written very competently. It didn't really feel like reading a debut. It was very well done, I thought. So I gave that 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave Swimming in the Dark 3 out of 5 stars. And then this next one, The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, I gave 5 out of 5 stars. So obviously where we're going to sit them at the minute is The Vanishing Half as number 1, Love After Love as number 2, and Swimming in the Dark as number 3. So The Vanishing Half, I probably don't have to tell you guys much about. It has been raved about on BookTube in general. It follows 2 sisters, one who decides to marry a black man and identify as black and live her life that way, and the other sister passes as white and ends up marrying a wealthy white man and living in kind of white suburbia. And it deals a lot with race and family ties, and these sisters are estranged, and then their daughters by chance meet, and it opens a whole can of worms on this family history. So race is very much the prominent theme of this novel. I think it is a very important novel because it also talks about mixed race identity and about the different types of colour and colorism in non-white culture, and how that is defined by society and within certain cultural spheres. How, for example, whites perceive more mixed race, lighter skinned individuals, how lighter skinned individuals are seen in black communities, and all this different layering of the demarcations for how non-white or how black you identify, or how others identify you. I think those conversations are really interesting, and this is a really exciting novel because this is one of the first ones I've read where it's really gone into the debate around colorism in the non-white community and the effects of that on individuals. And I have read some British books where, for example, a black individual has started a career in the police and they are seen by their black community as being a coconut, as being black on the outside and white on the inside. But I'd never really seen fiction and novels really get into the heart of that issue of how being mixed race or more lighter skinned or having a dual nationality or dual culture has affected the individual sense of self. For example, a lot of mixed race individuals say that they don't feel like they identify as white or black because both communities don't really see them as either black enough or white enough to belong to that race or that identity or that culture, whatever it may be. So I found that this book was really insightful on that topic. And it had this slow, beautiful style where it slowed your reading right down so that you were really in that moment. The chapters, the way they were broken up, you couldn't rush the story along. It went at this gentle pace, which I found really powerful, and a real credit to Brit Bennett's writing style, that she could slow you down as a reader and really make you change your pace of reading and what you're taking in, and allow you to almost have that time to reflect while you're reading the book. I've never really seen a writer be able to create a pacing from their reader in that way, so I found that fantastic. So I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I'm sure you've seen hundreds of reviews on The Vanishing Half all over BookTube, so I won't bore you with that anymore. So the next books I've got to read are Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. I've seen a few people comment on my announcement video for the quarterfinals saying how much they loved this book. It's historical fiction, which is my thing anyway, so I do think I will get a lot out of this. It does say on the front that Graham Norton has described it as thrilling, mysterious, twisted, which sounds good because I really enjoy Graham Norton's book, so if he's enjoyed this one, then that is a good omen for this. Set in London in 1863 and deals with Brit Devine, the finest female detective of her age. To recover a stolen child, she must enter the dark world of medical curiosities. So it definitely ticks a lot of boxes for a historical fiction that interests me. Might be a little bit dark. Very much looking forward to this one. I have also found out from BookTube, from the comments in my announcement video, that this is down in the UK as a different name. So this is down as A Girl is a Body of Water by Jennifer Nansabuko Mukumbai in the US, but in the UK it's down as The First Woman, which is deeply frustrating because I have now, since I've ordered this, found that it was available on my library BorrowBox app and it was down on Kindle Reads for 99p, and I ordered this hardback, so a little bit devastated about that. But anyway, it is what it is and we all have to move on. So this is a book set in Uganda, follows Karibo, and it talks about, she wants answers about who her mother was and her childhood. It looks like she's raised by her grandmother. So I think this will be an interesting story. I've read quite a lot of diverse fiction in the last 18 months that have dealt with places like Nigerian fiction and other places in Africa, but I've never read about Uganda, so this will be an interesting perspective. And I'm looking forward to this one to see what it will be like. I've read similar things like Conjuring Women and The Death of Vivek OJ that have dealt with some themes that I think might overlap in this book, so it'll be interesting to see what this book turns out to be like. I also have a Paragon by Colin Mccann, which is available on the BorrowBox app, so I downloaded it last week. I have requested it the maximum amount of time, so it gives me around 40 days with it, so I'm going to crack on and read that, and then I will check in with you guys with my findings on that one. That will be the first one, and then I'll be reading these two. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to give you a bit more in-depth analysis and wrap up of these three books, because I feel like I have kind of done a bit of a whistle-stop tour with the other three books, but I did read all three of the books a while ago now, so at least a few months ago for The Vanishing Half, and even longer for Swimming in the Dark and Love After Love. And I also don't want to bore you with a lot of rehashing of those books, because you'll be shortly seeing with the playlist that will come out for the quarterfinals for the BookTube prize so many people's initial thoughts on those three books. So I hope that you guys don't take it against me that I've just kind of told you a bit about them and then parked them up, because I feel like these three books, because they're new to me, I'll have much more to say on these to kind of even out the vlog overall. But I'll check in with you guys when I next have some books that I have finished, so that I can talk to you about the next three books on the list. So I'll see you then. Hello everyone, so this is my second check-in with you guys for the quarterfinals BookTube prize. So this is the fiction group D. So as I mentioned in the first clip, I have already read Swimming in the Dark, Love After Love and The Vanishing Half, and I have now finished A Paragon by Colin Mccann. And this was a really interesting story. It's not what I expected. It was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and it follows two men, Rami and Bassam. Bassam is a Palestinian and Rami is an Israeli, and the book deals with the Israeli occupation of Palestine and about these two men who create an unlikely friendship based on the fact that both their daughters have died. So Bassam's daughter Bia and Rami's daughter Samada. And this book really teeters on the edge of the genre of fiction, I believe. It's a fiction non-fiction. So like people talk about narrative non-fiction or fictionalized non-fiction. this is kind of a fiction that is heavily influenced by non-fiction. So this book draws upon interviews of the two men. It has real life photographs. It takes snippets out of newspaper articles, and it deals heavily with different facts and bite-sized pieces of information. So this story will discuss things like the flight of certain birds, the development of the rubber bullet, historical pieces about influential figures and meetings, and a whole host of other stuff. But what is really interesting is this book has a very different style. It will start inserting little bits of true life events and factual information for quite a period of time, and then intersect this fictionalized account of these two men and their experiences. For example, Bassam was in his youth in prison for a while, and it talks about Rami's experience of losing his daughter and Bassam's experience of losing his daughter, and then them finding friendship through the Parents Circle, which is an organisation which is set up for individuals all over the world who've lost their children to conflict and war. And then when it intersects these little sections of the men and their lives, it enhances the facts and the non-fiction elements because they link constantly to the wider story. And then it raises this wonderful place where you can mull and reflect on the different themes that it's introducing, like the futility of war and the detrimental effects of citizens living during a period of occupation, politics, human rights. It talks a lot about the rubber bullet, which is very significant because Abia, Bassam's daughter, is killed by the Israeli government shooting at her with a rubber bullet, and the rubber bullet is horrific. It's encoded in rubber, but it's metal underneath, and it kind of causes so much destruction. And it talks a lot about her death in the back of the skull. She was shot at with a rubber bullet. And I found those bits really profound, understanding how it was made, how destructive it is. And then both of the daughters' deaths, we get a lot of time spent going back through that day from the parents' perspectives. For example, with Abia, she was in an ambulance for hours, and they said that there was rioting and there was roadblocks. And it's heartbreaking because inevitably she should have had hospital intervention much earlier, and just trying to live through that tragedy and having a Muslim only entrances on the motorway to the country and Israeli only entrances, and how it was really interesting towards the end of the book where it talked about particularly Rami and his expectations of Palestinian people, and he talked about his hatred of them and how that had been born through his experiences growing up and the Israeli and Palestinian conflict and their beliefs, and how he realised that he wasn't really seeing Palestinian individuals as people, as humans. And then when he met Bassam and realised that all of our children are being killed, we're all losing, we're all grieving, we're all struggling, he changed his mind, and particularly he is against the occupation, which is controversial, particularly where he lives, and being friends with a Palestinian and going on tours and promoting peace and non-violent methods of resolution has not gone very well for him. And then they overlap with a discussion about the Holocaust and both men's particular interest in that as well. So it ties a lot of really interesting threads together. I thought this was a really unique approach to fiction. I thought it was written absolutely beautifully. I think it plays a really interesting discussion in this wider narrative that we have in the booktube book-loving world at the moment about who can write what. So I researched the author, and he's Irish, and yet he did some research. He went to Israel and Jerusalem, and he met the men, and he's been given authorization to talk about this story. but he is not Palestinian and he's not an Israeli. He's Irish, and he's done this book, I think, with the utmost respect. He's done so much research. It is a beautiful homage to these people and this real life experience, because Bassam and Rami are real life individuals who this happened to. But it made me think recently about a lot of the controversy that's been surrounding other figures like Edna O'Brien for doing the book Girl that dealt with the issues in Boko Haram, and about Janine Cummings and her book American Dirt, which has had a lot of controversy because they said she's talking about the immigration experience, and she isn't an immigrant. And I believe that this is a really good example. I haven't read American Dirt, but I read Girl and really enjoyed that, of a book that's done tastefully, and in my personal opinion that's the only threshold. Research, integrity, respect are those kind of things that I think need to be taken into consideration when you're doing a fiction or a non-fiction about somebody's real life experiences, particularly if you don't belong to that community. But I don't have any issue in this book with this, and I haven't really heard a lot of conflict or issue about him writing about this, and I just find that very interesting, that it seems in the booktube world that we cherry pick who is deemed controversial and who's not. I have seen that American Dirt has been well regarded by Oprah and her book club, and here the Richard and Judy book club as well. So I think it's a long-standing debate, but this book really made me think about that, because I thought no one's ever criticised this particular author and what he's done. He's kind of been praised. He's been longlisted on the Man Booker Prize for this piece of work, and I think it's fantastic. I think it's written beautifully and it really deserves recognition. But it just made me think of those kind of things, and I just found it something interesting to think about. Anyway, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very powerful. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm kind of stuck with where I want to place it. I don't know whether I will change my mind, but currently where I'm going to place it is under Love After Love. It's kind of hard because these 3 books that I'm judging the next 3 books along, there's been a bit of a break, but I remember loving Love After Love so much. So it's going to go for now, number 1, The Vanishing Half, number 2, Love After Love, number 3, A Paragon, and number 4, Swimming in the Dark. And then I am going to read later today, I've started, but literally only a few pages, of Girl is a Body of Water. That's a very big book. It's about 500 pages, so I'm going to read that one because I know the Jess Kidd book, Things in Jars, is a lot less pages and it'll be quite easy to get through and read. But again, I will catch up with you guys when I have got further along with the next few books, and I'll let you know in the next clip whether I'm quite happy with Love After Love to stay above A Paragon. I think I've read A Paragon too soon when I'm filming this to have really settled my feelings on it. But it's definitely going to stay at 4 stars. And I feel like Love After Love, the more I think about it, is going to stay in that top rating of the 4 stars as opposed to A Paragon. But I don't want to deter anyone from A Paragon because I think it's a fantastic and creative and really innovative piece of fiction. But I'll check in with you guys.
Hello, so I have literally just finished A Girl is a Body of Water by Jennifer Nanzabuka Makumbai, and it is the 20th of April, so I'm doing quite well in terms of I have literally just finished the penultimate read of the quarterfinals, so I only have 1 more book left to read, and I was very undecided till the last 100 pages where this was going to sit, but I think this book ended up being slightly too long for me, and so in some ways it's made it a little bit easier of where I'm going to position this book. So I've decided since my last clip that I'm happy to have Love After Love above A Paragon. And I think this book is going to then go under A Paragon. And I think partly because it's a little bit too long, it was quite hard because when I was reading this, I think it justifies being a lengthy novel because it goes through the different generational stories. So this focuses on one character, Karibo, but also on her grandparents' story, their complicated relationship and kind of their love triangle, and then Karibo's experience of growing up in Uganda in Nateta, where she lives, and about the family that she grows up in, and how her grandfather has a lot of local land, and about her growing up and questioning and trying to figure out who her mother was, because she grows up without her mother. She doesn't know much about her. She grows up kind of from her grandparents, but she does have a relationship with her dad that we start to get to know more about. So it's her story growing up, really, from a child into adulthood. So it's really a Bildungsroman kind of novel with a really interesting cast of female characters. So it's quite interesting in this book. You get to see where both of the titles, A Girl is a Body of Water or the first woman title of the UK version of this book, where they've kind of come from, because there's a lot of references to women, how they are depicted in Ugandan society, how they are depicted in most cultures. European culture as well is discussed a little bit in this novel, and how misogyny and patriarchy in both the European and the Ugandan context is doing a disservice to women. And the main protagonist meets a lot of female characters in this novel that kind of teach her some of the feminist ways, and she learns how to navigate the world. She is in a more privileged position than some other people she meets, because her father works in the city and he earns a lot of money, and her grandfather is kind of in charge of a lot of the local land, so she is from a well-to-do family. But she obviously has a lot of limitations, and we discuss that in the book. So it justified its length in some ways, because it was discussing a lot of different characters and their past, and some of the bits like Karibo's relationship with Sio, her love interest, and that was quite interesting. And then I found, when we went back in the last quarter of the book to her grandmother's time and her grandfather's time and another character in that and what developed, I found that interesting, and that was captivating to read. But the problem was the last 100 pages really slowed my overall reading down for this book. I read almost 60% of it in one sitting, and then I was determined yesterday to finish it, and I was in bed and the last 100 pages were just dragging, so I left the last 100 pages to today. And in some ways we had such a lengthy history about certain things, and then the ending really didn't give us any resolution on some of the things that were developing in the story. So I don't think the ending was bad. I think a lot of people will be quite happy with the ending, because it just stopped there in time. We kind of could infer what was happening. It didn't give us that, which is fine. But as I came to the last 100 pages, it became a lot more evident to me that it just had lost a few little points here and there along the way because of its length. So I think I would give it between 3.5 and 4 stars. But I think Paragon was doing something a little bit more creative in this genre of fiction, really playing around with that non-fiction element. It had some interesting photographs and the story was very powerful. And I think this book is a lengthy historical fiction that was enjoyable, certainly, and I don't regret reading it, and I've enjoyed the reading experience, but just didn't do enough to kind of catapult it into the front running at the moment. So yeah, I think a lot of people have loved this book and raved about it, and a lot of people have told me I'd love it, and I did enjoy it. I just didn't love it because the last 100 pages or so became a bit of a drag, which kind of pulled the overall rating of the first 3 quarters down a bit, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's that. So my ratings at the moment are The Vanishing Half as number 1, Love After Love by Ingrid Passard as number 2, 3 as a Paragon, and 4 as A Girl is a Body of Water, and number 5 as Swimming in the Dark. But I have one more book left. So the last book is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. Now I know I've now been catching up on the Quarterfinals vlogs that people have been putting up, and a lot of people really enjoyed this book, and it got quite good reviews from a lot of people who judged this book in the octafinals round. So this seems to be quite different from the last book I've just read, but again a historical fiction that's set in 1863 in London, and it's had quite good feedback in general, so I'm excited to read this. This is a lot shorter than the other books, so I'm hoping really that I'll finish this by the end of April, and then I can already just put my ballots in, edit these ready to go up in the end of May, and have a month in the bag to read some other books before my new kind of course starts, my new module for the course starts, so then I can have a little bit of a breather. But yeah, I'll catch up with you guys when I have finished this book, and I'll give you my final rankings, final thoughts, and wrap it up. So I'll see you guys then.
Hello everyone, so this is the last segment of my quarterfinals vlog, and it is around the 24th, 25th of April, and I finished last night Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. Now, this book in the end just middled out, and I was expecting to enjoy this a little bit more than I did in the end. So this follows Bridie Devine, who grew up poor in London, and she lived with a family, and a lot of incidents happened during that time living with a doctor, and he had a son and he lost a daughter, and then he meets her along the way in London and adopts her and takes her back to his house, and a lot of events happen around that. And the period of time she lived there for, a lot of incidents happened, and then they're reflected again in her adult life when she's kind of confronted with the son. And the second narrative kind of running along this is that she helps the police out when they really can't identify bodies and what happened to them. And so she's used to being around dead bodies and trying to find the cause of death, and she's quite interested in investigative criminology, as we would say nowadays. But there is a lot of magical realism in this book. It plays a lot with mythic folklore. It has a very aquatic theme about it, very based around water in the sea and folk tales of sirens and things like that. I think people who like The Essex Serpent would really enjoy this, and I rated The Essex Serpent really highly when I read it a few years back now. And I think there's a lot of overlap with this historical fiction in terms of the style. It's very gothic-y Victorian London. I think Bridie is a really interesting protagonist. There also is a bit of a play around with kind of hauntings, and there is a main character in here who is dead, and Bridie kind of conjures that person up. It's almost like a ghost, which I think she did quite well with, considering I don't really like tropes of being haunted in terms of making that person a fully fledged protagonist that everybody else doesn't see but they see. I don't usually like that, but I think it was done quite well, and I think he was an interesting character, and it created a really interesting relationship between the two of them, and there was a kind of reveal embedded in that which I thought was quite well done. But overall the writing was very busy. The way that Jess Kidd writes sentences, it was clunky in parts because she'd throw a lot of things in there, and I think she tried to get into that Victorian frame of mind, and so she tried to write it in a different type of way where it was more reflective of maybe how people would have spoken in Victorian times, but it sometimes made sentences very heavy and busy, and so it did take me a while to get into that style. And so my main criticism of this is just that I would have periods of time when I was really immersed in the story, and then periods of time when the next chapter would pull me out, and I don't know whether it was because the writing style was a little bit clunky, it just needed slight refining. I think she can write really nicely and the sentences were pretty, but sometimes it would then take a few pages for me to get back into the story. I really liked the different time periods. We went back in time to when Bridie was young and then to present day. I liked those, and I think the dual timelines and storylines were as well developed as one another. I don't think that the past storyline was any detriment to the present one. I think they both worked very well. But yeah, sometimes I was pulled out of the story a little bit. I think the ghost protagonist had a bit of a limitation in terms of where you could take that character, so that was inevitable from the beginning. It kind of made for frustrating reading sometimes because it was a limited character and we were spending a lot of time developing a character that we already knew was dead, so that was just a little bit frustrating for me. But I actually really like the magical realism in here, aside from the kind of ghost plotline, which I think was limiting, but the actual mythic, folklore, folktale was really fun, really dark as well, but really interesting. I liked the whole siren mermaid thing, and I think that has a lot of overlap with the Essex Serpent, because the Essex Serpent has that kind of mythical water-based creature as well. So I think if you like that, you'll definitely enjoy this. I feel sad to say that I'm giving this 3 out of 5 stars, because I think it has a lot of strong potential, and this is definitely not a criticism of the author of the work. I just don't think it shone as brightly as some of the others in this category. And maybe just with a little bit of refinement, Jess Kidd will be a fantastic historical fiction author, and I definitely want to go back and read her other 2 books, because I know that each of her books are very different with the themes. And I know that some people have read The Hoarder by Jess Kidd and really enjoyed that. So it was good. I just think for me, a 4-star and above needs to be great and something special. And I think A Girl as Body of Water was doing a lot more. I enjoyed that story, and it was just more satisfying and consistent. I think that's the key word with this one. I think it dipped in and out of consistency for me, this particular story. And when I was in it, I was really in it, but there was definitely periods of time where I was pulled out of this and I had to get back into it, which I didn't have with any of the other reads that I was assigned for this judging round. Obviously, apart from Swimming in the Dark, really, and a Paragon was so creatively done and so much was going on. So I just thought when I had to compare it with the others, it just didn't propel itself out of a good read. It was just a good. But I think people who love historical fiction will really enjoy this, and I definitely would recommend reading it if it sounds interesting to you. I just had to think with my judging hat on with this. So I've given this 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm going to place it below A Girl is a Body of Water, but above Swimming in the Dark, because I enjoyed it more than that. So I'm sure you've already figured out where everything is going to go, but my final rankings stand as number 1 is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. Number 2 is Love After Love by Ingrid Passard. Number 3 is A Paragon by Colin Mccann. Number 4 is A Girl is a Body of Water by Jennifer Nanzuka Mukumbai. Number 5 is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. And number 6 is Swimming in the Dark by Tomas Jodrowski. So that is it. I have put my ballot in. They are my choices. And I won't have already, by the time this has been loaded, I won't have known on this video what's got through to the next round, but obviously when this goes live I will have done then, and I probably will get my next selection of books, which I probably think will be non-fiction. So hopefully I'll be judging the next round. I will put my interest forward and see what happens with that. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now.